If you're a fan of comics and chronically online like myself, I'm sure you have seen the Comics Explained situation. I really don't want to dive into the situation, but something Comics Explained said inspired this video. He said something along the lines of, and don't quote me, that a comic book about black characters with black writers is political. Comics Explained is actually correct here, but I think he's missing the point. Comics have always been political. Not just milestone comics or comics about minorities, but the foundation of comics is politics. As someone who has a degree in political science, I would say I'm qualified to make this claim. So let's start. First, let's dive into the definition of being political and the origins of comics. Being political is defined as relating to the government or public affairs of a country. Before comics were their own standalone entity, they started off as comic strips in newspapers. A lot of these comic strips contain political strips regarding political figures and things going on in the country. One of the best examples was the political cartoon turned comic strip that was The Yellow Kid in McFadden Flats, an offshoot from the Hogan's Alley series, both of which featured the Yellow Kid, Dugan, and his friends in the slums of New York. This comic served as a critique of the conditions that came with poverty in New York. The first comic strips were about politics, and this continued when they expanded and became comic books. In the 1930s, also known as the Golden Age of comics, Superman was created by two Jewish high schoolers in Cleveland, inspired by the rise of Nazism in Europe and anti-Semitism at home. Superman fights Nazis in the comics and even declares war on Hitler and Stalin before the United States joined the war. Superman's early stories were very pro-working class, showing him fighting corrupt businessmen and abusive bosses. His creation and stories were clearly political, but it doesn't stop there. Batman's early stories were also very political. He was seen fighting access powers in Nazi Germany along with his sidekick, Robin. He was seen fighting corruption in his city, a direct response of decreasing trust in the police. The last hero I'm going to talk about in this era is Captain America. I mean, America is literally in his name. How can it get more political than that? But to cast any potential doubt that Captain America isn't political, in his debut comic, the cover was him punching Hitler. Captain America, like Superman, was created by two Jewish writers, and it was in direct response to the rise of Nazi Germany. Superman, Batman, and Captain America, who kick off the golden age of comics, are all inherently political characters. Their stories were very progressive for the time and were inspired in response to the rise of Nazi Germany. Now let's move on to the Silver Age of comics. The X-Men are a clear allegory for racism, segregation, and the civil rights movement. I know everyone has heard the comparison of Professor X and Magneto to Dr. King and Malcolm X. While I do have some problems with this comparison, I do think the X-Men as a concept is reminiscent of racism. People are hated, beaten, and even killed for something they have no control over. People don't have control over their race, just like mutants don't have control over their genetic makeup. The X-Men don't just show the problem of discrimination within our society, but also in our government. Besides Magneto, Apocalypse, and other superhuman enemies, the biggest antagonist of the X-Men is the United States government. They pass anti-mutant legislation, attempt to track mutants, and even create a task force aimed at controlling or even killing mutants. They legit create huge robots whose sole purpose is to kill or capture mutants. But disregard 25-foot robots. Does this not sound familiar? It sounds just like what happened to black people in America. Laws were passed to restrict black freedom, from Jim Crow segregation codes that limited where black people could live, work, and go to school, to voter suppression laws that prevented full participation in democracy. Beyond legislation, the government actively surveyed black leaders and activists, from Dr. King to Fred Hampton and countless smaller organizers, often using government agencies to undermine, intimidate, or even discredit them. Just like mutants, black Americans were not only hated by segments of society, but also systematically targeted by institutions with power. During the 1960s, Black Panther was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and made his first appearance in Fantastic Four number 52. Jack Kirby discussed that the inspiration for Black Panther came from his black audience. He noticed he had a lot of black people reading his comics, but didn't have a single black person in his comics. This led to the creation of Black Panther. Black Panther is such an important character for black people because he shows a world of black success. A lot of black movies focus on black people's trauma and troubles, which is important, but black people also deserve content that is uplifting and shows the joy of the black community. This is why Black Panther is so important. He shows black people being smart, rich, and strong. The nation of Wakanda shows what Africa could have been had it not been impacted by racism and colonialism. Wakanda also showed Africa in a positive light. America tends to portray Africa as a country where everyone lives in a hut, doesn't have clean water, and has no internet. This is simply not true, but harmful and racist rhetoric. The creation of Wakanda completely flipped that idea and showed Africa as one of the most advanced places on Earth. While in real life, Africa as a whole can still make improvements to its infrastructure and technology, it is a lot more advanced than many Americans think. And as silly as it sounds, Wakanda may have been that reason that some people realized the beauty of Africa. The Silver Age of comics continued the trend of superheroes being directly related to political issues, but focusing more on racial inequality and the civil rights movement going on during that time. Next is the Bronze Age of comics, which saw an increase in the political topics discussed in comics. X-Men get more blatantly political with Chris Claremont as the writer, as he dives deeper into themes of state surveillance, political extremism, and genocide. During this time, Luke Cage was created and became the first African-American superhero by Marvel Comics to be the main character in his own series. Luke Cage's character and background explores several racial and political themes. His story takes place in a primarily black neighborhood and directly engages with the justice system and economic inequality. Luke Cage is a wrongfully imprisoned black man who gains his powers through a prison experiment, reflecting how the criminal justice system has historically harmed black communities. Unlike many heroes, Cage becomes a hero for hire, connecting what he does to survive under capitalism. He shows the reality of being a hero, but also having to pay the bills. This era also has the iconic Green Lantern, Green Arrow comics. These comics touch a lot of hard-hitting topics. First, this was a collaboration comic with Green Lantern, who's essentially a space cop, and Green Arrow, who's a vigilante. Their very different backgrounds and beliefs created tension that mirrored real-life debates about authority, justice, and individual responsibility. The comics did not shy away from controversial topics. They explored racism, poverty, corruption, and drug addiction, most famously showing Green Arrow's sidekick Arsenal struggling with heroin use. Green Arrow often challenged the social and political systems that Green Lantern trusted, forcing readers to question these systems in real life. This comic is one of the most influential of all time. While comics have always been political, this comic touched on plenty of topics that many writers still shied away from, and having two characters with differing beliefs made readers think in a way that forced them to question their own values instead of simply accepting one clear answer. To wrap up the Bronze Age, I just want to kind of speed run through some other things that happened in comics during this time. So Captain America became fed up with the corruption in the United States government, which led him to ditching his name and becoming Nomad. This was a direct Watergate allegory and showed how many people were beginning to distrust the government. Daredevil became more popular in this era, and a lot of his stories center heavily on systematic corruption in Hell's Kitchen and how crime is tied to poverty and neglect. Daredevil, being a lawyer, also allowed his stories to explore the criminal justice system in a way other comics couldn't. Tony Stark struggled with alcoholism in the Demon in a Bottle story. This story pushes back against the capitalist idea that money can buy you happiness. Tony's one of the richest men in the world. He has the cars, the mansions, the status, and still he is deeply unhappy. Swamp Thing reflects the real-life increase in environmental activism. Swamp Thing's comics show how destructive humanity has been to the environment and how corporations often prioritize profit over preserving the earth. The comics critique corporations that exploit land and resources without considering long-term consequences. Pollution, chemical dumping, and reckless development are portrayed as acts of violence against the natural world. The Bronze Age of comics marked a turning point where superhero stories fully embraced politics. Instead of avoiding controversy, comics began confronting issues like racism, environmental destruction, addiction, poverty, and problems with capitalism head on. The Bronze Age proved that comics could challenge dominant narratives, critique the government, and spark meaningful conversation about society. Now we move to the modern era of comics. This era is still going on, so bear with me, this may be long. Let's start with The Watchmen. This is one of the most blatantly political comics to ever be made. Written by Alan Moore during the height of the Cold War, Watchmen reflects the constant fear of nuclear warfare and global tension between superpowers. In this world, superheroes are not noble or moral figures, they are political tools, government assets, and deeply flawed individuals struggling with their own trauma and mental health. This comic questions the government and unchecked power, and how superheroes would realistically operate in society. Watchmen is one of the most impactful comics ever and remains relevant today. It permanently changed the tone of superhero storytelling. It demonstrated that comics can provide complex political commentary, not just action-driven entertainment. Another iconic comic released around this time was The Dark Knight Returns. We talked earlier about the political origins of Batman, but The Dark Knight Returns marked a major turning point for the character. This story presents a Gotham City in chaos, where crime and corruption have overtaken the streets, highlighting the failures of the government to protect its citizens. Bruce Wayne is forced to come out of retirement to do what the government cannot do, or chooses not to do. It also shows a government-controlled Superman, displaying how the government prioritizes power and military over helping its citizens. Let's move on to a post-9/11 America and how comics addressed politics during that time. I want to talk about Marvel's Civil War. Now, I think it's very clear how something called a civil war could be political, but I'm going to explain it anyway. Marvel's Civil War centered around the Superhero Registration Act, which would force people with superhuman powers to register with the government and operate under federal oversight. Iron Man was for the registration, believing it was necessary in order to ensure the safety of the population. Captain America was against the registration, believing it was a violation of privacy. The parallels to real-life politics are hard to ignore. After 9/11, lawmakers debated security versus freedom, state power versus individual rights. That debate led to the passage of the United States Patriot Act, which dramatically expanded government surveillance authority in the name of national security. Now, this is just my opinion, but I think Civil War is criticizing the government's decision to prioritize state power and security over individual rights and personal freedom. As much as I love Iron Man, he is clearly not the hero in this story. The writer portrays Tony as having good intentions, but is very willing to overstep boundaries to achieve his personal view of safety. He helps build a secret prison in another dimension to detain unregistered superheroes without trial. He clones Thor, which leads to Goliath's deaths. He pressures Spider-Man into revealing his identity, and he authorizes the villains to hunt down former allies and supports aggressive enforcement tactics. Now, I was Team Iron Man and Loki still am because he's cool, but he is so wrong when it comes to the Superhero Registration Act. In theory, it doesn't sound like a bad idea, but can we really trust the government to use this information properly? These are the same questions people had when the Patriot Act passed, and years later, when Snowden revealed government secrets, society realized they were right to ask those questions. Civil War captures post-9/11 anxiety and forces readers to confront a very difficult question. How much freedom are we willing to give up in order to feel safe? To end this modern era, it is important to recognize how comics have become more diverse and how that shift is inherently political. Expanding who gets to be a hero reflects broader cultural debates about representation, power, and belonging. Characters like Miles Morales, Kamala Khan, Jaime Reyes, and Riri Williams are not just legacy heroes. Their stories engage with immigration, race, religion, policing, and identity, mirroring real-life political conversations happening in America today. This evolution shows that comics continue to respond to the political climate around them. Just as the earlier eras reflected the Cold War fear or civil rights tensions, the modern era reflects debates about diversity, equity, and who has access to power. By broadening representation, comics challenge traditional ideas of who gets to lead, who gets to be protected, and whose stories matter. Comics have been and will always be political. I know people like to read comics just for fun, and I encourage that. But we should also think about the deeper meaning of what we are reading and how it relates to real life issues. Especially in such a challenging time like this, it is important that media literacy is prioritized. We must be aware of the message that movies, shows, and of course the news are spreading. Lastly, I encourage everyone to vote. I know it sounds corny, but the change starts with the people. Like, comment, and subscribe for more videos. See ya.